Thank you for joining me today. It's Brian Gubernick, and welcome to the No Days Off podcast, where we believe that every single day brings a new opportunity to get better. There is a quote from Charlie Munger, who, if you've been listening to NDO for any period of time, you know he's one of my most favorite people to study and understand. There's a quote from Charlie Munger that I think should be mandatory reading for anyone that who wants to lead, sell, recruit, negotiate, or just frankly make better decisions. Charlie Munger said, "I never allow myself to have an opinion on anything unless I know the other side's argument better than they do. I never allow myself to have an opinion on anything unless I know the other side's argument better than they do." That is a hell of a standard, in my opinion, because most people do the exact opposite. Most people form an opinion rather quickly, and then they go searching for evidence to support what it is they may already believe. So they hear a data point or a story, or they hear some sort of, a frustration or a trend, or they have one conversation, and then they lock in. They're committed. Like from that point forward, they are no longer trying to learn. They're just trying to win. And the problem is with that, when you are trying to win, you usually stop listening. And that really matters, of course, in entrepreneurship and in business, because in business, it's not just a game of having the right answer. Business is a game of getting more people to move, right? Clients have to move. They have to take action. Employees have to move. They've got to take action. Partners have to move. Prospects have to move. Everybody in your world has to move. Leaders all have to move. And people rarely move because you beat them in an argument. They move when they feel understood well enough to actually trust you. And this is the crux of today's episode. This is what makes Munger's quote so powerful. He is not saying that you should be weak. He's not saying that you should be neutral forever. He's not saying every opinion is equally valid. What he is saying is that before you take a solid or firm position on anything, you should understand the strongest possible version of the other side. Not the straw man version, not a lazy version, not the version that you can easily throw aside or dismiss. I'm talking about the strongest version of the opposition, of their position. And this is where so many of us drop the ball. A great leader says, my team, or a leader, and not a great one, a leader might say, my team just doesn't want accountability. And that may be the case in this particular example. Or maybe their argument is that accountability has not been consistent. Maybe they have seen standards applied differently depending on who produced the most revenue. Maybe they do not object to accountability. That's the reality. Maybe they object to surprise accountability or unclear accountability or accountability that only shows up after something goes wrong. There's an example, right? Understand the other side argument just as well or better than they do. Again, they don't want accountability, might be my perspective, but maybe their argument is, again, surprise accountability is not something they like. Unclear accountability is not something they like. Maybe another example. A business owner says, my people are resistant to change. And they dig their heels in and that's what they believe. Well, maybe that's true. Or maybe their argument is that the last 3 changes were announced with intensity and then they were abandoned after like 60 days. Maybe they're actually not against change. Maybe they are against whiplash. Maybe they're tired of being asked to emotionally commit to the next big initiative when the organization has not proven ever that it can sustain anything that it supposedly commits to. Let's just say a salesperson, another example, a salesperson says, the client only cares about commission. The client only cares about commission. Well, maybe. Or maybe the client's argument is, I don't yet understand why you are worth more because you have not made the invisible value visible to me. I think it's a very different problem. If the client is cheap, you might resent them. If the client is unconvinced, you've got to go to work. And so understanding their argument is imperative. And that, what I just described in those three examples, that is the leadership lesson. When you do not understand the other side's argument, you can easily misdiagnose the problem. And when you misdiagnose the problem, you can prescribe the wrong solution. You push harder when you should be asking better questions. You explain more when you should be clarifying. You get frustrated with resistance when the resistance is actually just more intel, more information. This applies everywhere. In recruiting people to your organization, the person you want to hire may not be saying no to your company. They may be saying no to uncertainty. They may be wondering whether the opportunity is real. They want to know whether the leader is stable, whether the role has a future. I mean, there are so many things that are possible. If you do not understand that argument, the argument that they're making, you keep selling features, or you potentially keep selling features when what they really need is confidence. That was recruiting. In sales, the prospect may not actually be saying no to you. They may be saying yes to the comfort of doing nothing. That's actually fascinating to think around. They may be afraid of making the wrong decision. They may have had bad experience in the past. They may believe all agents, salespeople say the same things. If you do not know that argument better than they do, you will sound like every other person trying to overcome an objection. Now, to be clear, this does not mean that the other side is always right. That's a really important point to make. It does not mean the other side is always right. Understanding their argument does not mean surrendering to their argument. It means that you are disciplined enough to separate your ego, your identity, from accuracy. You can understand someone fully and still disagree with them. In fact, when you understand them fully and still disagree, your position is stronger, not weaker. So you should be asking yourself, okay, great information. How do I then uncover their argument? How do I uncover their position? Well, I think you start by changing your goal in the conversation. See, most people enter a disagreement trying to respond. You need to enter trying to represent. What do I mean? Your goal should be that by the end of the conversation, you could explain their point of view so clearly that they would say, yes, that is exactly what I mean. Does that make sense? So rather than entering a conversation with the mindset of how will I respond, enter the conversation trying to represent, meaning make the goal by the end of the conversation that they would say, if you explain it back to them, yes, that's exactly what I mean. That is the standard. So you got to ask questions like, hey, what am I missing? Or what would make my position wrong? Or, hey, what is the strongest reason not to do this? Or what have you seen that maybe I have not seen? Or what is the risk you think I am underestimating? See, these are not soft, gentle questions. They're pretty disciplined questions, and they force you to get below the surface and better understand their argument. Because most people do not give you their real argument first. They give you the easiest argument first. They say things like, I don't have time, or it's too expensive, or I do not think this is going to work, or I need to think about it. Those are usually not the real arguments. Those are the labels sitting on top of the real arguments. Your job is to keep going. So when someone says, I don't have enough time, the real argument may be, I do not believe this is important enough to prioritize. When someone says, I need to think about it, the real argument may be, I do not feel safe making this decision yet. The best leaders, the best salespeople, They do not stop at the first sentence. They listen for the belief underneath the sentence. And I think that's where influence lies or lives. I'm sorry. Munger's quote is a call, I think, to slow down before you speed up. Before you take the hill, understand why someone thinks it is the wrong hill. Before you launch the initiative, understand why someone thinks it will fail. Before you just throw out the client's objection, understand why it makes perfect sense from their side of the table. When you do this, you earn the right to lead. When you do this, you earn the right to lead. So my challenge for you is to deploy what I'm talking about. Go deeper, understand the other side's argument before taking any step moving forward. Listen, right? Don't defend for the first number of minutes in a conversation. Do not explain, don't correct, just listen and take notes. Try it on your next conversation. I promise you, it will change the game. Clarity comes from having discipline to actually understand the other side before you make a decision. That's all I have for you today, the No Days Off podcast. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, every single day brings a new opportunity to get better. So let's get after it.